K9 dragged the cop to a backyard vent what was hidden below Stundall. It was early morning, just after 6 a.m., when Officer Mason Coyle pulled his cruiser onto Alder Way. The street was quiet. Trees rustled in the wind, sprinklers hissed on green lawns, and the sun peeked over the rooftops. Nothing seemed wrong, but Mason had a feeling in his chest he couldn't explain. Next to him in the passenger seat sat Sable, his new K9 partner. She was a lean, focused Belgian Malinois with sharp ears and eyes that seemed to see everything. They had only worked together for 3 months, but already Mason trusted her more than most people. She had saved him once in a warehouse raid, pulling him back just before a hidden tripwire exploded. Since then, Mason paid close attention when Sable acted strange. They were called here to check on a woman named Lois Farron. Her neighbors hadn't seen her in days. Newspapers were piling up, her car hadn't moved, and she hadn't answered any phone calls. She lived alone and was 76 years old. Mason thought maybe she had fallen, maybe forgotten to charge her phone. It seemed simple enough. But as soon as they got out of the cruiser, Sable stiffened. She let out a low growl, her body tense. Mason noticed her nose twitching, ears locked forward, eyes fixed on the front door. "Sable?" he said softly, placing a hand on her back. She didn't move. Her hackles were raised. She stood in front of the door like a statue guarding it. Mason walked up the steps. "Lois Farron, this is the police, just here for a wellness check," he called. No answer. He reached for the doorknob, but suddenly Sable darted in front of him. She growled louder, blocking his way. Mason blinked. Sable wasn't aggressive without reason. She wasn't trained to attack unless ordered. This was something else. "Easy, girl," he whispered. But she barked a sharp, single barkhand, placed herself right between him and the door again. Mason backed up. Something about this didn't feel right. He pulled a small camera scope from his pocket and slid it through the mailbox slot. The inside was dark and quiet. The hallway looked untouched, but farther down he saw something Odon overturned walking cane and a pink shawl on the floor. He grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Coyle. I'm at 329 Alder. Requesting permission to enter. Possible medical issue inside." The reply crackled back. "Copy that, Officer Coyle. You're clear to proceed." Mason put his hand on the doorknob again. Sable growled deep and low. She pressed against his leg, like she was trying to hold him back. Her eyes stared at the door, unmoving. Mason knelt beside her. "What is it, girl?" he asked quietly. She whined, just once. It wasn't angry, it sounded scary. Then suddenly, the doorknob turned from the inside. Mason stood up fast. His hand went to his holster. The door creaked open just an inch. Nothing moved. No footsteps, no voice, just darkness behind the crack. "Mrs. Farron, this is Officer Coyle. Are you all right?" he called. No reply. He gently pushed the door open with his boot. Sable let out another sharp bark and bolted through the opening before Mason could stop her. "Sable, wait," he called, but she was gone. Mason rushed in after her. The air inside was heavy and smelled strange, like metal and dust. Curtains were closed. No lights were on. He followed Sable's paw prints down the hall until he reached the living room. There, Sable stood frozen in front of a large chair. Mason stepped forward, and his heart dropped. In the chair sat Lois Farron. Her face was pale, lips trembling. One hand hung over the side, the other was clutched tightly in her lap. "Ma'am?" Mason asked gently. Her eyes opened slowly. "Don't move," she whispered. "They said it would go off." Mason's eyes widened. He looked down at her lap. Beneath a wool blanket was a blinking light wires, tape, and a small box. In her hand was a trigger. Sable stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on the device. Not barking now, just watching. Lois's voice shook. "He said if I moved, I'd die." Mason's mouth went dry. Sable hadn't stopped him from entering because she was afraid. She had been trying to keep him alive.
Mason froze. his eyes locked on the small blinking light in Lois Farron's lap. He had seen bombs before, but this one was different. It looked homemade, taped together with wires, a plastic box, and a small circuit board. The trigger rested. In Lois's trembling fingers, Sable lay low to the ground, eyes fixed on the device, not making a sound. "Lois," Mason said calmly, crouching near the chair, "you're doing great. Just stay very still, okay?" Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. He said if I even breathed too hard, it would go off. "Who?" Mason asked. "Who said that?" "I don't know," she whispered. "He wore a hood, gloves. He came at night, broke in while I was asleep. Said I was perfect because no one would suspect someone like me." Mason's heart raced. He tapped his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, I need a bomb squad and backup now. We have a possible live device. Elderly woman was rigged with explosives. Suspected. Hostage. Copy that, Officer Coyle. Units en route. ETA 7 minutes. 7 minutes." It felt like forever. Mason stayed low, flashlight in hand, scanning the room carefully. There under the chair another device. Smaller, tucked deep into the wooden frame with a thin antenna. He backed away slowly. This wasn't just a one-trigger setup. It could be set off remotely. He keyed his mic again. Requesting mobile. Signal jammers. Possible remote detonation threat. Advise all teams to stay silent and use the rear entrance. Sable stood, muscles tight. She wasn't barking, but she was alert, ears twitching. She was listening to something Mason couldn't hear. Then she moved, slow and steady, toward the back of the house. Mason followed, careful not to step too loudly. They reached the kitchen, and Sable growled low and deep. Mason looked through the back window. There, standing in the middle of the yard, was a man in a black hoodie. He wasn't moving. He just stood there, holding a phone, staring right into the house. Mason's stomach dropped. That phone could be the detonator. He whispered into his mic. Suspect located. Male, hoodie, cell phone in hand. Standing in the backyard. Do not engage until jamming is active. But the man moved. He stepped closer to the house. His thumb hovered over the screen. Sable barked once, then twice. Mason's heart jumped. 2 barks. That was her trained alert for danger. "Sable, no." Mason called as she shot forward. She crashed through the back door like a missile, leaping at the man. He flinched, but it was too late. She hit him full force, knocking the phone from his hand. He fell backward into the dirt, arms flailing. Sable pinned him to the ground, her teeth just inches from his face. Mason ran out after her, gun drawn. "Hands behind your head." "I didn't press it," the man cried. "I swear." Mason grabbed the phone, then cuffed him quickly. "Who sent you?" He barked. The man said nothing. His face was cold, his mouth tight. Just then, Mason's radio crackled. Signal jammer active. Remote devices now disabled. Mason finally let out a breath. Sable sat beside him, tail still, eyes never leaving the suspect. "Good girl," Mason whispered. Inside, the bomb squad entered. They moved quickly and carefully to Lois's chair. "We've got a second device," one of them said. "Looks complex, timer-based, 26 minutes. Can you disarm it?" Mason asked. "Already working on it." He walked outside to watch as the man was loaded into a cruiser. Something about him felt familiar. The sharp jawline, the scar on his chin. Then Mason remembered. Silas Bourne, former military, dishonorably discharged. Known for building traps, explosives, and working with fringe groups, but nothing ever proven. Now they had him. Mason turned to Sable. "How do you know, girl?" He whispered. She didn't bark. She just stared back at the house. A few minutes later, Mason heard a call from another room. "Oh, Officer Coyle? You need to see this." He followed the voice to Lois's bedroom. A bomb tech was standing near the bed. On top of the covers were folded men's clothes. Next to them, an old leather wallet. Inside it, a driver's license. Recently, fresh. Name, Dr. Walter Farron, Lois's husband. The man who was supposed to be dead for 6 years. Mason's breath caught. How was this possible? Was Walter alive? Was he working with Silas? Had Lois known the truth? Behind him, Sable let out a soft whimper and pressed her nose toward a vent in the wall. Mason's hand tightened on his flashlight. Something wasn't over yet. Mason dropped to one knee and looked closely at the vent that Sable was sniffing. It didn't look like a normal air vent. It was smaller, freshly screwed in, and slightly crooked. He ran his fingers along the edge and found a tiny screw loose in the corner. Something about it felt off. He pulled out his multi-tool and carefully unscrewed the cover. Behind it, he saw a narrow tunnel, not part of any air system, not even close. Mason clicked on his flashlight and aimed it inside. What he saw made his chest tighten. It wasn't just a vent, it was an opening to a crawl space. A dark, narrow tunnel that led deep under the house. He tapped his radio. "Dispatch, this is Officer Coyle. I've got a hidden tunnel behind the bedroom wall. It leads under the house. Request backup to sweep the basement perimeter." "Copy that, Officer Coyle. Sending support now." Sable didn't wait. She barked once and started crawling into the space. Mason hesitated, then followed, flashlight in one hand, the other resting near his holster. The tunnel was dusty and tight. Old insulation lined the walls. The air smelled like damp concrete and mold. It was hard to breathe, and Mason's knees scraped against the rough ground. But Sable pressed on, never hesitating. About 20 feet in, the crawl space opened into a wider chamber, a hidden basement room no one had ever seen. Mason stepped inside and stopped cold. It was a bunker. There was a mattress on the floor, a desk covered in papers, canned food stacked in crates, and a bulletin board pinned with maps and radio notes. A burner phone was still plugged into the wall, and in the far corner sat a folded American flag. This wasn't just a hiding spot. It was a command center. Sable padded across the room, sniffing slowly. Then she stopped at a locked steel door and barked twice. Mason moved in carefully and pressed his ear to the door. A sound. A faint cough. He stepped back, raised his weapon, and waited as two other officers arrived through the rear stairs. On Mason's count, they burst through the door. Inside was a man tall, gray-haired with deep wrinkles and calm, alert eyes. He raised his hand slowly. "Don't shoot," he said. Mason stared at him. "Walter Farron?" he asked. The man nodded. "I thought you were dead," Mason said quietly. "I was supposed to be." Walter replied. They brought him upstairs to see Lois. When she saw him, she gasped and nearly collapsed. "Michael, I mean Walter," she whispered. "You're alive." Mason sat them both down and demanded answers. Walter took a deep breath and explained. 6 years ago, he had been recruited by a secret group inside Homeland Security. They were investigating a growing threat militias that were training ex-soldiers to attack targets in the U.S., not with bombs in buildings, but by using everyday people to carry devices without knowing it. They were using the invisible, Walter said. People no one would suspect. Old women, disabled people, children, people who would never be checked or doubted. Walter had to disappear to get close to them. They faked his death. Lois had agreed to keep the secret. "I hated lying to her," he said softly, glancing at his wife. "But it was the only way." Mason's hands curled into fists. "So why now? Why her?" Walter's voice dropped. "Because I was going to expose them. And Silas Bourne knew it. He found out. He got to Lois first. Used her to send me a message." Mason looked at Sable. She stood near the couch, alert again. "She knew," Mason said quietly. "She sensed it before any of us." Just then, Mason's radio buzzed again. Another call. Another welfare check. Different neighborhoods. Same warning signs. An elderly blind woman and her young son hadn't been heard from in days. Mason didn't wait. "Suit up," he said to his team. Same plan as before. Quiet, controlled, no front door entry. Sable was already pulling on the leash before they left the station. Her body was stiff, nose in the air. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the next house. It looked normal curtains. Closed, porch swept, no broken glass. But Sable barked twice. Danger. She led Mason around the side of the house, through the yard, and straight to a stack of firewood. Behind it, another small vent, just like before. "Found it," Mason said. "Rear entry breach. Go." They rushed in. Inside, the woman was tied to a chair, scared but alive. Her son was locked in a closet, dazed but unharmed. And under the couch, another device, armed, just like the one under Lois. The bomb squad disarmed it in time. Sable had saved them again. But that night, back at the station, something worse happened. Sable was gone. Her kennel had been breached. The cameras were shut down. Her handlers were found knocked out. Sable was missing. And now, it was Mason's turn to listen. To find her before it was too late. Mason didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk, staring at the empty space where Sable's leash used to hang. She was gone. And this time, she was the one who needed saving. He called every contact he had: federal agents, local police, old friends from his military days. Nothing. No sightings. No clues. The cameras near her kennel had been disabled. The guards had been knocked out with tranquilizers. Whoever took her knew what they were doing. Then, 3 days later, a package arrived at the precinct. No return address. Just Mason's name. Inside was a flash drive. Mason plugged it into a secure computer. The video that played made his stomach twist. It was black and white footage from a rooftop camera. The street outside Mason's home. There was the unmarked van that had taken Sable. Then another van pulled up behind it. A man got out. His face was hidden by shadows, but he walked straight to the van and attached something underneath. Mason paused the video. A small black box. A tracker. They followed her. Mason whispered Dot. He called the agency, but it was too late. Sable was no longer in the government's care. She had been taken again. Mason felt a fire light inside him. He pulled up every file from the Silas Bourne investigation, going over everything with fresh eyes. Then he found it a financial paper trail. A small payment to a shell company Silas once owned. It was tied to a property outside of town, got an old hunting cabin deep in Militon Forest, got no cell service, no neighbors. Perfect for hiding. That night, Mason drove through heavy trees, his cruiser bouncing along the dirt path. His heart pounded with every turn. Then, he saw it, a small cabin in the clearing. Headlights off, he parked behind the trees and approached on foot, weapon drawn. He saw movement to shadow on the porch. He crept closer, heart racing. Then he heard it, a bark, short, sharp, familiar. Sable, Mason whispered. He ran forward and kicked in the door. Inside, 2 men spun around. One held a phone, the other a detonator. And in the corner, chained and muzzled, was Sable. Her eyes locked with Mason's. He didn't think so. He fired 3 shots. One hit the floor near the detonator, forcing the man to drop it. The second hit the phone out of the other man's hand. The third made him freeze and raise his hands. Mason rushed to Sable and removed her muzzle and shackles. Didn't wait. She leaped onto the second man, pinning him down with her paws, growling low. The fight was over. Mason cuffed the men and called it in. They had planned to use Sable as part of a new test, to send her into a public building wearing a hidden device. She wouldn't have known. She would have trusted them. But again, Sable chose to fight at sunrise. Mason walked her through the doors of the precinct. No one said a word. They didn't have to. She had come home later that week. A courtroom was packed with quiet people as a judge read the final sentence. Silas Bourne, you are hereby sentenced to life in federal prison with no chance of parole. Mason sat in the back, his uniform clean, his hands folded. Sable lay at his feet, calm but alert. The case was over, but the scars would remain. A few weeks later, the precinct held a ceremony, not for action, not for bravery, but for goodbye. Sable was being retired. She had done more than anyone ever asked of her: saved lives, stopped bombs, uncovered evil. But now, it was time for peace. Mason stood at the front of the room, voice low but steady. She didn't just follow orders, he said. She followed her heart. She listened when we didn't. She acted when we froze. And she protected this city, not because we told her, but because she knew we needed her. He reached down and unclipped her badge and service collar. Sable looked up at him. He swore. Just for a second, she smiled. She didn't go to a kennel. She went home to Mason's small house near the edge of town. She had a soft bed, a yard full of grass, and a bowl with her name on it. Time passed. Her fur turned gray. She walked slower, slept longer, but every evening, she still waited by the door for Mason to come home. And every night, she curled beside his bed, just like always. One spring morning, Mason found her lying under the tree in the backyard. The birds were singing. The sun was warm. She was still. He sat beside her for a long time, hand resting gently on her side. No words. No tears. Just love. That week, the department lowered their flag to half-mast. And outside the station, they placed a small bronze plaque. Read, Canine Sable, loyalty beyond orders.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Love Tales of Tales, for long, heartwarming pets and animals. Love stories that stay with you long after they end.